behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World Season 2. Our magazine partner for the series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Those of you who missed our earlier session today, Virtuoso, V. Sangvi in conversation with Pragya Tiwari, you can catch this on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF, or on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, as well as all of our earlier sessions, and of course our sessions from JLF at London. Our next session today is Three Women, Lisa Taddeo in conversation with Ira Trivedi. Lisa Taddeo's latest book, Three Women, is a worldwide sensation which explores the intricate depths of the female heart and all its passion, heartbreak, and intimacy. The book chronicles the emotional lives and loves of three American women with diverse backgrounds from three different regions of the United States. Conversation with author Ira Trivedi, two-time Pushcart Prize-winning author and journalist, Taddeo discusses the grim truths about desire and power and how we perceive women. Lisa Taddeo is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of Three Women and a two-time recipient of the Pushcart Prize. She's a columnist for the Sunday Times in London, and her debut novel Animal and short story collection are forthcoming. Ira Trivedi is a best-selling author and yoga acharya. She has written 8 books, including fiction, non-fiction, and children's books. Her book, India in Love, Marriage and Sexuality in the 21st Century, is a landmark book on India's new social revolution in marriage and sexuality. She is the founder of Namami Yoga, a charity that teaches yoga and life skills to underprivileged children. Please do remember to ask questions and comment by typing it into the comment section below, and we will ask these of our speakers. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our Facebook or YouTube channels. Ladies and gentlemen, Three Women, Lisa Taddeo in conversation with Ira Trivedi. Lisa and Ira, welcome to JLF's Brave New World. Over to you.
Thank you, Sanjoy. Thank you, Lisa. It's such an honor and a pleasure to have you here. There's no better way to spend a Friday night than to spend it with one of your favorite authors over Zoom, right? So this is a real dream come true.
Absolutely, and it's a pleasure to meet you.
And thank you, Lisa. It's so wonderful. When your book came out in 2019, I devoured the book. So when I was asked to come and do this session, I was so pleased. I felt it was some sort of the universe somehow connected it. So I really hope that we can answer not just my personal questions, but to all the listeners out there. So many things. But before we get started, I just thought I would read something that was published in the New York Times. And I thought it was very interesting and also very telling about your life a little bit. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to read maybe just for 2 seconds this introduction. And then I want to fast forward to your life today. And this will also help give our listeners a little bit of a personal introduction to Lisa's life. Picture a 23-year-old woman dancing on a table in Manhattan bar on, say, a Thursday night. Around 11 p.m., she says her goodbyes and rushes to Penn Station so she can make the 11:38 p.m. train to Short Hills, New Jersey, where she is living with her Italian mother, who doesn't know how to drive or write checks. Her father was recently killed in a car accident, and so this young woman has become her mother's protector. Despite staying out late, she rises early the next morning to catch the train back into the city, where she works as an editorial assistant at Golf magazine. But she misses the train and instead cries with her mother at the kitchen table, chain smoking Marlboros. Right? And now say fast forward 15 years, Lisa, and now you are a mother of a wonderful daughter, happily married, living in a country home in Litchfield, Connecticut, and apparently seems like a very stable and nice life, for so many writers out there. They're like, wow, this is what we want to, this is the life that we want to live. So what was the bridge? I mean, what was the big change factor? Was it Three Women? Was it this book? Or was it something else?
I don't, it's funny. It's like the book, I did the book I was researching the book for a decade.
Lisa, sorry, will you be a little louder? We're not being able to hear you perfectly.
Me?
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah,
Okay.
just a little louder.
Can you
Thank
hear
you.
me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Um, so for a decade, I was researching and writing the book. So it's hard to parse what happened in my life during, like what the sort of bridge has been. I suppose that the book has been a bridge in a way, but also certainly, meeting my current husband, my daughter, just everything in life. It's hard because I don't know what the bridge was. It was, I guess, 15 years, a 15-year long bridge.
Which was a lot of it was the book, you know,
Yes.
a lot of it was the book. So no, so that it seems like it was a real defining moment in the past to the present, you know, it's what bridged it. Um, Now, Lisa, just now jumping to the book, because you mentioned how you spent 8 years driving around, you know, multiple times crisscrossing the country, and interviewing hundreds of people. And I'm guessing this included men as well, you know, men
Hmm.
as well as women. And you finally settled on three women, you know, three women who you selected: Lena, Sloane, and Maggie. And how did you, and you know, so how did, and you would walk into random bars, and you know, these are three very different women of three different locations, three different age groups, three very different personalities. But when you were doing these conversations, you know, when you were finding these subjects and you were going into bars and all across, then I mean, did people open up to you freely about their sex lives? I mean, and men as well. Or did you ever find it like a little dangerous? Like, oh my gosh, if I talk to him about sex, he's gonna think I want to have sex with him. You know? I mean, how
Yeah.
often? What were some of these challenges?
Yeah, the thing with men, that was a challenge. What was also a challenge along the same lines was men needing to sort of to feel they're not being able to let go of their egos when they were talking to a woman about their sexuality, whereas other women were much more free speaking with me, obviously because same gender. Um, in terms of, it was really hard. I did ask a lot of people in bars and restaurants if they wanted to talk about their sex lives. Um, with the three women that I landed on, I would say that they selected me or the book as much as I selected them, in the sense that it's very hard, as I'm sure you know from your book and books, that it's hard to get people to talk about desire and sex and love. And so these three women gave me the most of anybody that I spoke to, and were just so open. And what I was really looking for was stories happening in real time, like, things that were not a story from the past, not a memory of a past love affair, but something happening in real time that was trenchant, but mostly that somebody would just tell me everything about.
And Lisa, you know, so with these three women, you know, what were some of their motives? Maggie, I understand, you know, Maggie, she wanted, this was retribution for her. She wanted her story to be heard again because when she went to court, she didn't get the results that she wanted. But what about Lena and especially Sloane? You know, what about these two women? Why did they speak to you? You know, what was it? Did they just need someone to speak to and to open up with? Or what was it? What was it that drove them to spend, you know, especially in the US? People don't have time. You know, it's like errands, chores, kids, lives, cooking, cleaning, everything. Then how did and why did they give you this time?
Well, with Lena, she had very few female friends, or very few friends, period. She could not talk to her family about her desires, and even just wanting to take a break from her children during the day. Um, so with Lena, she wanted to talk to someone as much as I needed someone to talk to me. So with her, it was almost like, I mean, she didn't care that I was writing books. She didn't care whether or not I used her real name. Of course I didn't, because I think I knew that it might be troubling for her. I don't think certainly none of us thought that the book was going to be read as much as it was. So if it had been, Lena would have still done it, I'm fairly sure, but Sloane probably wouldn't have. Um, And as you say, it was the most difficult because it was interesting, and I never we were I'm friends. I would consider myself a friend of all these women, and I'm particularly close to Maggie. But Sloane, we talked, and it was freeing for her to talk because it was an anonymous conversation with someone who wasn't judging her and somebody who didn't know all the people in her life, so she could feel free to discuss her life. So she liked doing that, but she was certainly the person who was the least motivated, I guess, to be written about.
And yeah, Sloane is today, I've read here or there in some of your interviews that she, the book may have gotten her into a little bit of trouble even because she comes from a smaller place, and a smaller community where she may have been recognized. But do you still have a relationship with her till today?
Yeah, we haven't spoken in a month or two. So yes, we have a relationship. We're fine. I just, it's a situation where, if we had known the book was going to be as widely read as it was, I probably wouldn't have put Sloane into it.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And what about the men? The men of these women. Did you spend time with them too to get to, because in the book, they're it's as if you have spent time with them, right? You're really to all our listeners out there, Lisa's book, even though it's nonfiction, it reads like real fiction. It's such a vivid read, and that's what makes it so wonderful. So what was it about? Did you spend time with these men?
I didn't spend that much time with them. The one that I was really wanting to talk to was the teacher who was Aaron Nodal, who had the alleged affair with Maggie, the underage girl at the time. So I tried to contact him numerous times, phone calls, emails. I faxed his lawyer and called his lawyer. So he never responded, which was, I did want his side because that was a public, he was, it was public record, and I wanted that I thought it was important because I was using his real name. But with the other men who I did speak to and, talk to mainly through the women, I never really spent time with the men by myself. Because what I realized fairly early on was that these women had stories that the men were not a part of in their heads, and to sort of bring the men into it in any kind of a real way would be giving the men their voices when it wasn't about them.
Okay, that's very interesting. And it also speaks of your ability as a writer because you've described them as if you really do know them, so that's wonderful. And now, last question about the book, because I want to move on to your own life and also to your writing process, which I think would be fascinating for for all the listeners here and for all the aspiring writers who are joining in. Um, Lisa, so much of the sex in the book was violent, and honestly, when I was reading the book and after the book, it's like, I never want to have sex again. I don't want to ever have sex because this sex seems like a violent thing, it's a violent thing that men are doing to women. And this is what sex seemed like. And it really made me just have a very, grim vision of sex, and, you know, and this is what's also happening today in India, if you, so much television, all the new shows, all the new movies, they look at sex in such a grim and violent way. Very rarely now do you find even the sort of the more romantic movies, even there it's violent, So, I mean, how did you feel when you were writing, listening to these stories and so many other stories? And strangely, not strangely, but ironically, at this time you had this wonderful husband, or maybe he was sort of, you were about to get married, or with Jonathan, right? And he seems Jackson seems like such a wonderful and supportive man. He was, working at Kmart while you were researching your book, to support both of you and traveling with you and being there for you. So it's kind of an ironic situation that this book has, talks about sex in such a grim and violent way.
Well, I mean, when it comes to Maggie, obviously that's its own thing because
Yeah.
she was raped and taken advantage of. So that is its own thing. When it comes to Lena, she was raped as a young woman, which from all the hundreds of women I spoke to, I would say 80% of them had some sexual assault that had happened to them. And I think that the latest figure in the U.S. is that 1 in 3 women, their first sexual experience was not something they wanted. So it's, that's what we're dealing with, at least in the U.S. So, a lot of the stories I heard were grim, and they were not, the Princess Bride story that Lena thought she was going to get one day. So I was really just telling the truth of that. When it came to Lena's sex with Aiden, the man who she was having an affair with, it was, he wasn't doing anything to her. She was running towards him because it was the only time she'd had sex in her whole life with somebody that she wanted to have sex with somebody that made her feel sexy and like a woman. And her sexual experiences were so vivid. She told me everything. She would write down Facebook messages to me, literally every thrust by thrust. And what I found lovely about it is that she was almost more so having sex with herself. And that sounds silly, but in a spiritual way, she was sort of finding herself in those moments, finally getting what she wanted. So even though the man that she was having the sex with wasn't going to, become her knight in shining armor by any means, she was enjoying herself. She was making memories, she said, for the future when, she was on a rocking chair on a porch and 90 years old. And when it comes to Sloane, Sloane's, I don't think there's violence in Sloane's either because, obviously there's some violent things that have happened to her, but with her current sex life and the one that I wrote about in the book, she has sex with her husband and enjoys doing that. And they have sex with other people, and sometimes she has questions about it. And she was at a crossroads when I met her, which was very interesting to sort of see her parse everything that she was feeling. But I think the issue with Sloane is that her sex life is, aberrant from most sort of monogamous couplings in the US, for example. But aberrant was just, it doesn't mean bad. It's just hard for other, it's hard. A lot of people didn't really see themselves in Sloane because I think it was the hardest to see oneself in, except for this old man who is 87 years old. And he was reading my book outside of a bookstore. And I didn't really ever see many people reading my book. Obviously I know people read my book, but I never saw anybody reading it except for this man who was 87. And I went up to him and I said, "Do you like the book?" Because I was just, curious. And he said, "Yeah, I like it a lot. I'm just skipping to all the Sloane parts." And I thought that was funny. And I said, "Oh, why?" And he said, "Because my wife just passed away and we used to have, relationships with other people. And I was always so embarrassed and felt ashamed by it that, and having this memory of her and having this secret that we shared that I haven't been able to tell anybody else about, reading the story just really makes me feel seen." And so that was beyond amazing to see that and hear that.
Lisa, I'm trying to still formulate this question in my head right now, but I think it's an important one, because what you said earlier about this disassociation, right? Like these women were having, or especially, Lena was having sex to feel sexy, right? It was her experience of feeling sexy. And maybe it's part of an important part of womanhood. It's like a man, a man maybe wants to attract women or whatever to feel sexy, but maybe when women do it, it's thought about as a I don't know, as a bad thing, especially maybe here in India. But on the other hand, you said that, it didn't necessarily lead to a knight in shining armor either. So, what does that mean? Like that sex doesn't have to be associated with love at all, and that, they're two different things that women can experience independently, or that when they maybe do come together, then it doesn't always have to be. Does this question make a little bit of sense to you?
Yes,
What I'm trying to ask?
I think that with Lena, she was kind of desire personified for me. Everything she was thrumming with this need for this man, and she thought she loved him. Sometimes she thought, he didn't deserve her love. But at all points, it was something that was making her feel alive. She hadn't been touched by her husband for a decade. He didn't want to kiss her on the mouth anymore. She had 2 kids, and she was just doing, taking care of the house day in, day out, not doing anything for herself ever. And this was the first thing in her whole life that she had done for herself. So in terms of leading to a knight in shining armor and is sex independent of love, I think it's just different for everybody, and at different stages in someone's life. You can have sex because you just want to have sex with some sex and I just think it depends on, it just depends on where we are in our lives, who we're with, and what we want.
All right, that's good to know. I'm glad that you answered that question, which was a slightly wobbly question, really well. Thank you, Lisa, for ironing that out for me. Now, Lisa, going back, to your own life, sorry, I think we have a little bit of a issue. Sanjay, could you tell me if it's my internet or Lisa's? Because Lisa seems a bit frozen.
Oh, really? My phone
Yeah.
frozen?
Yes? Okay, thanks. Okay, great. Okay. Okay. I was like, did something happen? Okay.
Is it okay?
Ira, while we get Lisa back, I think she's frozen and she's going to, let me ask you, you're sort of seated in obviously what is your yoga studio, right?
Yeah.
And have you been doing everything online? Is that
Yes.
world? Is that your
Yes.
new world order?
Yes, this is the new world order. It's all online, just like, this is the JLF online. So yeah, online yoga has really taken off. And we actually have an entirely online yoga studio. It's a yoga studio which functions like a real physical studio, but entirely online. So it's been incredible, actually. And it's a whole new discovery that yoga online is better than yoga offline.
Wow. But how are you able to sort of, maneuver and make sure that they're actually doing what you've asked them to do?
Oh, so you can make corrections. So we figured that out, that if you see people on the screen, so we always keep it in gallery view, and we can actually see and make corrections to a lot of people. So now we've actually figured out the technology, the technique as yoga teachers on how to make these physical corrections online. So we're sort of correcting and things like that. It's quite lovely. It's quite nice. And so we said that we want to be different than, say, a YouTube video, right? Because it's a live class. So you need to have a little bit of that live element of corrections and all of that. So it's wonderful. You can have music in class. You can do everything. You should come, Sanjoy.
Going back to Lisa's book and your questions of her, one of the things that is much talked about is the sexuality of Indian women. And, you have the different strata of women, middle class, and the upper classes, and of course at the bottom end of the economic scale. And in all of that, at one level, you have the Indian woman really empowered, seeking out what she wants. And yet there's this sense that that's not true, and that, the West is far more liberal when it comes to sexuality. Is that true?
It's true, Sandra. It's absolutely true. Let me tell you something interesting. When I was having this conversation, it immediately struck me that, oh my gosh, should I ask them later to edit this part out of the JLF, to edit this part out of the video? Because if this goes public, and people hear me talking about this, and I could get in a lot of trouble. As a yoga teacher and a yoga acharya, I've gotten in a lot of trouble in the past because of stuff that I've said, and now the trolls are going to come out and say, "Why is the yoga teacher talking about sex? This is not, this is not part of the yoga world, right?" So this
They
is just
obviously haven't read anything about Kundalini yoga, right?
yeah, exactly. So yeah, well, I mean, so I mean, so yeah, I mean, there's gonna be someone when they want to fire some ammunition, they're gonna pull this out not now, but maybe 5 years later, and say that, oh look, why is this yoga teacher talking about it? So this just shows, right? I mean, here on one hand, I'm, a liberated Indian woman talking about this, but on the other side, it's running through my mind that, oh my gosh, am I going to get in a lot of trouble for this? And it's a genuine possibility.
Well, I suppose that's more keeping with the troll world today, or the world of
You know,
trolls that we live in.
I think I think what it is it's about it's less than it's about the constant fear you need to censor yourself. For me it's that. For a lot of women it'll be like, oh yeah, I do want to do this, but then oh my gosh, I have to censor so that people don't find out, or I don't need something doesn't happen. So I think there's a constant censorship that happens in India, in an Indian woman's, in a very liberated Indian woman's life. So that's the problem. So no matter how liberated you are, there's a self-censorship that goes on.
But Ira, is there a difference? I mean, of course, self-censorship, absolutely right. But has that changed the way the Indian woman looks at her body? The number of surveys that recently come out, or not recently, over the last decade or so, on Indian women's sexuality, they seem to be, as I said, far more empowered and far more out there, aware of their sexuality, and not anymore willing to be just the, you know, lack of a better word, the doormat in the relationship anymore. Do you see that? I mean, just look at, even if you look at the writing that's coming out with empowered women in its focus. I mean, of course, Shobha Day has always written about that. Even in more recent times, there's much more awareness.
I agree, Sanjoy, and this is also the time, right? I mean, this is how society is going to move forward and has moved forward. Not just here, but in across many cultures, right? Women are moving towards more equality, and you go into much more, progressive cultures where lesbian women are prime ministers, and Finland, so you go into that extreme where it's much more equality. So this is also the tide of time. It's sort of like it's the tide of time. One day a lot of people in India, there will be 100% literacy. There has to be, right? As time, technology increases, so on and so forth. But I still think, along with this, it is, of course, happening. There is empowerment happening, not just in India, but across the world. Maybe some small zones here and there where there's extreme, Islamic, whatever, where like, there's ISIS or whatever, and then women are all put, and these are small scenarios, right? Isolated scenarios. But in general, we're all moving forward. But the problem is that, what's interesting here is, what about this undercurrent which is here? That's what's to me more interesting. That while all of this is happening, there's also a counter revolution, in which there is a lot of assault, right? As women are moving forward, there's an entire backlash in India which is happening, right? So much more, sexual violence, rape, all of this stuff is going on because women are progressing forward, right? So this is the thing that we need to think about.
Yeah, isn't there a sort of dichotomy there? Because on one hand, if you look at Indian mythology, or even look at the Hindu, the goddesses in Hinduism, there is so much of the Devi worship, not just in Lisa's
Oh,
back.
Lisa's back.
Welcome back.
Yay.
Oh, fantastic. Welcome back.
We're having a rainstorm and my internet just completely went out. I tried to turn off my phone. I was like going, and I felt so. Anyway,
No worries. Welcome back. I'm going to just complete my question to Ira and then let you both at it. I was saying to Ira, Lisa, that in India we have such a strong tradition of female worship, whether it's the Chausat yoginis or later the Devi Puja. Devi means the goddess, because of fertility, etc. And you start and end all your rituals with that. Given that, why is there such a dichotomy on you worship the goddess and the woman and the women, the feminine energy or the feminine, and yet you have this kind of violence against women? And what's the dichotomy there? So answer that, and then back to you and Lisa. I'm going to hop off.
It's simple, Sandra, because it's an incredibly patriarchal culture. It's incredibly patriarchal. And this is symbology. How often do we translate this into real life? Very rarely, very, very rarely, if you look at the large percentage of the Indian household. So it's patriarchal, and India remains a deeply patriarchal country, maybe, with quite a lot so with a lot of recent incidents. So we're moving in a direction which is still patriarchal. Yes, the tide of time has to get rid of patriarchy. That is the tide of time. But, there's a lot of other issues that we're contending with. But anyways, let's move on to Lisa's book now. Okay, so yeah, all of this stuff makes me feel upset. Lisa's book makes me feel more joyous. All right. So, Lisa, you had mentioned that all through college you had a boyfriend, right? And that you'd sort of missed out on this frat sex, free sex. Do you think, I've read this in a couple of interviews, do you think that is important for sexual discovery? I mean, do you think that young women should go through their process, have multiple partners? In India, still till today, a lot of women are virgins till they get married. Still that is it's changing, and there is a sexual revolution, but that is still something which it's done. But how important is this?
For me, it wasn't so much that I needed to have more frat sex or any frat sex, period. It was that I had just had one boyfriend who I was fairly sure I wasn't going to stay with. But because I had lost my parents, it was difficult for me to sort of extricate myself. And he was a very kind person, and he's still one of my best friends today. So when I look back, I guess what I meant by that is not actually having missed out on specific sexual interludes at frat, houses. I suppose that was kind of shorthand for I didn't date other people in college. I didn't go to parties. I really just kind of stayed in the dorm and did my studying and stuff, and then saw my boyfriend on the weekends and had almost very little social life outside of that. So I just didn't feel like I got a college experience. Like when I watched normal people, I'm like, oh man, I wanted to live to have some of that. So that's no, I do not think that young women or anyone needs to have a certain amount of sex. I think whatever amount that you want is the amount that you should have. But often we don't know what we want until we look back and we're like, oh, I didn't do enough of XYZ, or I did too much of XYZ.
Oh, thank you for that. No, I'm glad. And okay, there's a last question about the book, and then I want to move on to your processes as a writer. And I really, when people ask me this question, I'm always like, man, I don't want, this is such a hard one to answer, but I'm just going to ask it anyways. What was the one thing, if you can just nail it down, one thing that sort of, writing this book that you really think, that you learned on a personal level from these multiple interviews that, not as a writer or not anywhere, just on a personal note as a woman. What did you learn?
Well, one of the first things is that everybody was having more interesting sex than I would have expected. People who a teacher I was interviewing who at first seemed so buttoned up, told me some of the things she did on the weekends, and it was just not shocking. It was not that but I was just like, we have all these expectations of people that are not right, but we just, judging books by their covers, etc. And so I did, I had to get rid of a lot of that, my own expectations and judgments and preconceived notions of people. So I found that often we are completely wrong about who we think someone is, because it's easier for us to sort of put people in little cubby holes so we can move on and be like, okay, that person's selfish. Now I'm going to move on to, you know, I don't want to be, but then as you move on, you start to see that, you know, okay, that person's selfish, but that person's selfish because XYZ happened to them. And what they want is to be, that was the main thing I learned, that everybody wants to be loved. You know, everybody. There's nobody who doesn't want that. There's nobody who doesn't want to be loved for who they are. Even though we try to be other people to feel loved, we want to be loved without trying to be someone else.
Thank you for that. And now, since we're 5 minutes away from audience questions, I want to just go to your writing process. You know, I think, Lisa, a lot of aspiring writers here would love to hear this. You know, when you were set out to write this book, I know that Thy Neighbor's Wife was on your editor's mind, at least. And Gates Elise, he writes, you know, he keeps notebooks, right? Apparently that's sort of his process, I've heard, is to write everything into physical notebooks, and apparently he's got a lot of them. So what was your process? Did you record everything on your phone? Did you take notes? Like, how did you, you know, 8 years of narrative, how did you record them, write them? And this is something I'm sure many writers would like to know.
Well, I had a tape recorder, not just for when I was talking to people, but also to just talking to myself to make notes. Like if I was with Lena, you know, I would just kind of make a note, and she would, you know, I would do it in front of her. And sometimes I would kind of walk away and just do my own notes. Often what I did is I would write down on my phone. I would email myself. Like, I'm sure, you know, there's all sorts of notes applications that people far more technologically savvy than me use. But for me, I still to this day, I have an idea, I have a sentence I want to remember, I just email it to myself. So that and a tape recorder were the main things that I used. And when I was driving with these women, they would drive and I would take notes on my phone. It just helped me more than sort of to have the tape recorder was important, but to have my takes on the way that the woman was sort of, you know, smiling or not smiling when she was saying whatever she was saying. And then in the evenings, I would typically transcribe what I had researched that day. And then, you know, a couple of days later, I would kind of trying to write through it.
And so you were writing the book alongside the note-taking process? I mean,
yes,
it was...
Yes, but I mean, how much of that made it into the book, I don't know. But yes, I was writing, alongside.
Do you have any of it stored now somewhere? You say, okay, for posterity, or I don't know, someone later needs to see them?
I mean, I have like probably 600,000 words that were not published that I didn't. I made my editor read probably 200,000 more words that are in there right now, and then I have an extra probably 400 that I didn't show anybody. So,
oh wow. And okay, so final question on a big success, right? #1 New York Times selling book, all of that. What do you think led to that? Was there a particular review that made it happen? I mean, before that, you weren't expecting it. You were, you know, you'd written books before, but they weren't really, you know, lauded the way that this book was, for whatever reasons. But how did that, I mean, what was it? Was there anything that happened? Did some celebrity tweet about you? Did someone read the book? You know, what happened? You know, what was the magic that made it just, you know, or was there anything?
Well, it was my first book. So I think, you know, I think like anything that is a success or a failure, it's a perfect storm, right, of a million different things. I think that, you know, there were people like, you know, Dave Eggers was one of the first people. I sent handwritten notes to a bunch of writers that I respected, and I thought no one was going to write back to me. And then I would get these notes back from people like Dave Eggers, who I didn't know, and Elizabeth Gilbert, who didn't even know who wrote it. She just found the galley in her mailbox, and it was like she would just wrote to an editor and said, I don't know who wrote this, but, you know, I want to talk to the writer. So there were a lot of things like that that were just wonderful people that I respected. And then, you know, Gwyneth Paltrow posted on Instagram the book, and all my friends from high school I was at a friend's birthday party and I just had all these messages, and I didn't know what was going on. And then I looked and it's like, Gwyneth Paltrow. So, that was not, everything was nice. Everything was great, but I did not expect any of it. It shocked me. It's still shocking when I kind of look back on the past year and a half and the past decade. It doesn't really, the two things don't really link up for me.
Well, it's always a blessing, I guess, right? That's how blessings come. So, okay, now heading on to questions. Let's move on to audience questions. I had one more, but maybe if there's less audience questions, I'll ask my personal question. But let's move on to others. So Sumit Daya asks, unlike with Sloan and Lena, the identity of Maggie Wilkin has not been ghosted. Did reporting, researching, and writing her story without that anonymous tag change the way you wrote? And was there any sense of pressure you felt when presenting her story?
A really good question. Yes, there was more. I mean, I had pressure with each of them because I wanted to make sure I did right by their stories and by their voices. And I sent the book to each of the three women before it was published, and so that they could make changes and take things out and add things. And what was really interesting is they didn't take anything out for the most part. They just added stuff or corrected me on things that I hadn't gotten precise. So that was quite amazing. In terms of Maggie in specific, I was concerned the most about her, not only because I was naming her, but because of what she had gone through and, just any kind of retribution. She had already suffered so much from people calling her names and such. And I was pretty sure that the book coming out would be different and better for her than the media that had sort of the local media that had misused her story and misrepresented her. So I told her when we were talking, I said, I don't know how this is going to go. It might be great. It might be terrible. And I just don't know. But my hope is that more people will believe you than the ones that did not in your town. And in fact, what happened with Maggie was the best thing in the sense that hundreds of women, young women mostly from across the world, have written to her saying how she's helped them get through their own pain and fears. And Abby Wambach, who was Maggie's hero, posted a picture of herself reading three women on Instagram. And I wrote to Abby Wambach and I said, "You're Maggie's hero." And she publicly wrote back, "Maggie's my hero." So things like that happening were, I was so worried about Maggie, and the fact that it worked out in that way thus far has been the greatest gift from the book for me.
Thank you, Leah. That was wonderful. Next question. Twinkle Sharma asks, when you were researching and interviewing these women, how did you go about working with them in a practical sense? How did you stay out of their lives and also avoid becoming over-friendly? That's a good one.
Mm-hmm. It was a fine line, one thing that I was very, very strict upon for myself was I never gave them any advice. I didn't want to change or affect the trajectory of their stories in any way. Because I was writing about them, it wasn't so much about my research or my book. I just didn't want to have any effect on a person's life. I just didn't. Another reason for that is every single friend I've ever had, they ask for advice, but they don't actually want it. And they might say, "Should I text him back?" And I'm like, "No, definitely not." And then the next day it's like, "I texted him back." So you just can't, people don't usually actually want advice is what I've found. But with Lena, who would ask me for advice, I would often just say, "Well, this situation happened to me and this is how I handled it and this is how I felt. I don't know what you should do, but I'm here to listen." In terms of becoming friendly, yes, I care very much for all three of them. I think I would be a sociopath if I just after 8 years was like, "Okay, all done." I care about them. The friend aspect was always there, but it was also always me asking them questions. Very rarely was I talking about myself unless they wanted me to. I wasn't, I wanted to share about myself in whatever way would help them, but it wasn't about me. So it was kind of like a one-way conversation in that sense. So the aspect of friendship was not in the way as much as one would think.
Next question. Kiara Gupta asks, while you were researching the book, did you notice any generation gap when it comes to desire? I've been thinking about this ever since I read your book.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that we, younger women, younger than me, women in their teens and early 20s, are certainly more sexually. They feel more, I guess, confident in doing what they want and having sex with whom they want. And then there's also obviously like what's going on in our world, certainly what's going on in our country. We're having a lot of going back in time. So there's certainly a lot of that. I did find generational changes. I mean, differences, obviously. I think there was one woman that I was profiling who was in her early 70s, and the way that she looked at sex and the way that she, things like, why would you give away the milk or the cow when you can get the milk for free, etc. So, younger women didn't really feel that way as much. However, everybody felt a certain amount of heartbreak and passion, and that was almost always the same.
Robin Lane asks, the depth of the events described in the book traumatized me on so many levels. Were you present during any of these events? Or is it the reporting and writing skills of yours which made it look and read so real? You did mention, Lisa, that all of this was happening real time.
Mm-hmm. With the things that had happened in the past, with Lena's rape, for example, often they had very detailed diaries. Maggie certainly had incredibly detailed diaries. Lena did as well. And they were much like with Maggie in particular. And I remember that from being her age. She remembered every single thing about the things that had happened with the teacher because of how much she cared for him at the time, or how much she thought she cared for him. And she remembered the color of her shirts. And, we would go over the same question and the same, for example, the night that she was in his home, I would ask her, what shirt were you wearing? What was the color? Where did you get it? How did you feel about yourself when you were wearing it? Did you try anything else on before you tried that on? What did he smell like? What was he wearing? What was the lighting like in the house? So I would just ask, when you are spending years with somebody, you ask them everything. And I did that because I wanted it to be as specific and real and as much as their memories could allow as possible.
Great. Now, Meenakshi David asks, we'll keep this as the last question. Judgment is such a heavy word when it comes to sex life and desire, especially that of a woman. The book has changed the way I used to perceive the subject. You can't really judge until you know the story behind it. What are your comments on this? That's a good question to end, or good thought to end.
Yeah, I think that we judge before we get to know people, and I think that that's one of the things that people have said. What do you hope your book has done? And I do hope that it makes people think about finding out what someone's history is before they sort of condemn them for their present, and also that we're not responsible for other people's lives. What someone's sex life across the street should not be our judgment. We should listen to the person across the street if they want to tell us about it, but we shouldn't, whisper and make judgments. And one of the main things that I think is really important to keep in mind is that with the Me Too movement, we have had obviously such amazing gains, and we've made such amazing strides in the way that we accept or don't accept things that men have done to us. But I think an inverse problem has been that women have judged other women more, in a sense, because there's this ideal of needing to be progressive and stuff. And with Lena, for example, a lot of people thought that her story was antiquated, and why would anyone spend time telling the story of a woman who was in love with a married man? And the reason is because she was a human being who had this powerful love. And if we are trying to be progressive, then the idea of leaving someone in the dark, of saying, oh, you know what, we can't write about you because you're a ghost of our past, is the opposite of what we should be doing as sisters in the Me Too movement.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I think now we're running out of time. So yes, just as I got a message and the time is up. So thank you so much um, from personally and everyone at JLF, and now handing over to Sanjoy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ira Trivedi. Thank you, Lisa Taddeo. Thank you, Lisa, for saying that, don't judge people without knowing their full backstory. Extremely important. And
Yeah.
thank you for talking about sexuality in the way that you've done in the book. I'm sorry we couldn't take all of the questions that kept pouring in because we are out of time. We do hope you have all enjoyed the session and you'll be back next week to watch another set of great sessions on JLF's Brave New World on 21st of October. And this will be at 7 p.m. IST, 2:30 p.m. British Standard Time, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. For those of you enthused, please do watch India by the Bay, Hong Kong, which continues tomorrow and day after. IBB has established itself as one of Hong Kong's landmark cultural festivals, and it sort of fuses the classical and contemporary across art, music, theatre, dance, food, literature, film, and wellness, essential ingredients of India's multicultural identity. And that's all the way till the 18th of October. Tomorrow coming up, we've got Music East and West, a legacy Shubhendra Rao and Saskia Rao, the House in collaboration with Tisho Manchuing. And then the day after, we've got Churchill Hero or anti-hero Shashi Tharoor in conversation with Bukalika Banerjee. And remember, on Sunday the 18th, we also have our marathon fundraiser gala, I Believe Art Matters, raising resources for artists and artisans across the country devastated by COVID-19. It's a 6.5 hour special marathon run with some of the biggest stars as well across music, theater, dance, literature, film, and hosted by Shabana Azmi and Manoj Bajpai. So catch that on the Give India or Teamwork Arts Facebook pages. And do remember, please donate. There is devastation across the sector, and artists and artisans need your help, and they need it now. Stay well, stay safe. See you soon.